Hello, everyone. I'm Damon Wilson, founder of the NIETOC, and now I serve in a role on the board as well as producer for the NIETOC. And I am here to talk with you all about cuttings and to give you all some ideas about how to cut your script. Before I start talking about cutting a script, I think that it's important that I give you all a little bit of my background. I have been in forensics since I was in the 8th grade. That was only a few years ago. Well, just kidding. As y'all can see with all this gray hair, y'all know I'm lying. But here's the thing. I've been in forensics for a long, long time. And one of the things that I discovered in forensics is that whenever I read a play, and I guess I have to start there, that it's important that you start reading plays, whole plays, not just quick cuttings, not just things that are written for forensics, but that you actually go back and start reading a play cover to cover. Because a cutting may never reveal itself the moment that you open up the book. Quite frankly, the moment you open the book, it can be quite boring. Or you can see a whole bunch of characters, or there's no way to even see the cutting in the script, and you have to go through it from beginning to end to see if it was worth doing. That said, or the novel or whatever that you're looking at as well, you have to do the same thing. But that said, when I started off in doing forensics, I found myself falling in love with reading plays and discovering these hidden lives that I didn't even know were out there. I almost looked at reading a play as if you're getting an opportunity to peek into someone else's life, to peek into their existence, to see what their trials and tribulations are, what their life journey is, what self-discoveries that they make about their own existence, how they deal with their own family problems or their own broken hearts or their own ideas about life. What really makes people tick? The more and more you read plays, the more and more I think you really begin to understand the world in which we live in. And that's important because I think before you select a script for yourself that you find worthy to cut, that you really have to have an understanding of what are the things that you really want to talk about. Finding a play to cut is not about what will please the judges. It is not about what other competitors did last year that won national tournaments. It's not about this is what the trend is in forensics. It's about finding literature that speaks to your soul, that speaks to your spirit, that makes you want to get up out of bed every morning and to work on it. That makes you, whenever you walk up there in front of that room, that it is an honor to be able to say those words or to take that audience on that journey. That's what you have to do in order to find a play worth cutting. So I found myself not only learning more about the world as I was reading these plays, but I also found that the more I read about those plays, the more I began to understand myself. What makes me tick, how I function in my own family, the things that make me angry and the things that make me happy, and the places in my own life where I find joy and sadness and sorrow and triumph and dreams. So the more you read, the more you begin to understand the world, and the more you also begin to understand yourself. And as you are reading plays, you need to be finding scripts that are challenging in that way. Not just so simple that it's just dealing with your own teenage issues. And not that there's anything wrong with dealing with plays that are about teenagers, but oftentimes those plays aren't as complex. Finding material that is challenging to you, finding material that's ahead of you, not just necessarily fitting you in your life at this moment. It needs to have aspects that you relate to, but it almost needs to be ahead of you so that you have something to chase throughout the year. The I'm not quite good enough to do this piece yet is a great thing because it will challenge you and it will keep your piece fresh each and every single time that you are working on that particular piece of literature. But I would be cutting you all short if I just started talking about, well, here's a play and here's how you cut it. If I didn't talk about the fact of that you really got to look at your motivation for why are you cutting that to begin with. And you got to be really honest with yourself about it. I find that a great place to start with finding cuttings or great cuttings is to go off of the Pulitzer Prize list. Go off of the Drama Desk Awards list. Go with plays that have received national and worldwide recognition. There's a reason why those stories are timeless. There's a reason why those stories receive those awards, and there's a reason why those plays are still being performed today, no matter when they were written. It's not necessarily just about the fact that the play has a 2021 or 2020 copyright on it, that means that it's deserving to be done. A play has to be worthy. The stories have got to be worthy. And how do you know if a story is worthy? Are the characters' thoughts rich? Is the language elevated? Like when I think about a great play, I think about the play Dancing at Lunasa or Lunasa. He says, at the very end of the play, he's talking about his family that had fallen apart. But he's also talking about the joys and also the sorrow that happened in his family. And he says, and when I think of it as dancing. Dancing with eyes half closed. Because to open them, would break the spell. Dancing as if language no longer existed because words were no longer necessary. Now, y'all, when your characters get up there and they start speaking like that, and they start taking our language and they elevate it, and they elevate those thoughts in that way, that's when you know you have something. And there are new plays written that way. And there are old plays that are written that way as well. But I'm challenging you to find great literature and find great literature that fits you, but that still makes you be challenged enough that you sometimes wonder, am I good enough to do this piece? Am I good enough to do this play? That is so incredibly important because to read a play, hours. To cut a play, days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months. I remember when I did Paul Robeson and I won the national championship in 19, and those of you all that are speech geeks, You all can go back and find when that was, when Damon Wilson won that. It was a long time ago. I don't even know if they even have videotapes of that anymore. I hear rumor they do. But anyway, back in that day, I did not finish cutting my script until right before the what was then called NFL, now NSDA, but it was NFL back in my day, national championships. I literally worked on that cutting for the entire school year. And I performed it, and I would see what works and what doesn't work and put things in and take things out. But it was a constant work because I never ever felt like I ever quite got it. Even walking across that national stage, I still knew that there was more that I could do. And even after winning the national championship, I still knew that I wasn't finished. And that's when I knew that I had a great play, because a great play will keep you excited. That's why I also think it's important as well to be reading plays, because sometimes whenever you get things that are just written for this activity and you only have 10 minutes to work with, that's the only 10 minutes you have. Plays allow for you to continue to evolve or to find other moments that now mean more to you, where you can reach out and grab those things and be able to put those things into your cutting. So, all of that said, enough of the commercial. Let's get down into the brass tacks of how do I cut a script and how do I recommend that my students cut scripts. The first thing that I do is, in the actual cutting, is I read the play entirely. And I read the play not thinking about, will this be a great DI, HI, or whatever, because sometimes you'll read a play with the intent of this is going to be your DI, and all of a sudden it becomes your HI, or it becomes your duo, or it becomes a part of your poi. So you have to have an open mind and open heart whenever you're reading it the first time. Then I will go back and I will read the play again, and I sit down and I chart out the dramatic structure of the play. Well, Mr. Wilson, what is dramatic structure? I chart out what's in the exposition, what happens in the initial incident. And I'm not going to insult you all with breaking down what is exposition, what is initial incident, and all that. But if you don't know what that is, you need to look that up. Okay? But I look at what's happening in the exposition, how the characters are explained. What is the first major action that happens that the whole play will be about, which is the initial incident. And then I'll also dictate major events that are happening in the rising action that are forwarding that plot, forwarding those characters. I literally sit down and chart all of that out so that I can see where the journey of that play goes. Then I will write down what is the climax, what is the big moment of change in the literature. And then I go through and I figure out the falling action. How do things get resolved after that climactic moment? What are the major points that happen in that falling action? And then ultimately, how is the play resolved? Do we find out what happens to each of the characters at the very end? Or does it just wrap up just the main characters at the very end? And that's very important as you are working on your cutting, to look at the rise and fall and changes throughout, because that's going to be the basis of how your cutting gets done. Then the next thing that I look at is I'll go back and I will start to put brackets into my script in pencil, of bracketing moments of what story do I want to tell out of that cutting, out of that script, that still sticks to the author's intent. Author's intent is important. Why did that playwright write that play? What was the message that the playwright was hoping that the audience walks away with? And how do I make a cutting that is going to be appropriate to what that author intended? And I literally go through every single one of those pages and I bracket those things that are still telling a story as I'm figuring it out. So that I basically make myself a 30-minute, one-act play version of this 2-hour, 3-hour, however long the play is story. I get it down to the 30 minutes of what I want to tell. Then once I've gotten it down to that 30 minutes of what I want to tell, I will then go through and I will start to nix out any characters that don't forward the plot. I will start to nix out any side stories that do not forward the plot. Because oftentimes in plays, rather than going from just point A to point B, they go down many different side streets. We hear about people that we never see. We hear about situations that don't really bring things to fruition. And so you've got to cut out all of those side streets and side stories out of there so that it's going to help you continue to build the plot throughout. Once I've taken all of those things out, I'll go back and I'll time it. And oftentimes I'm down to about 15 minutes at this point. And this is where it gets tough because you want to keep everything. You're like, you know what? I've really scaled this thing down to the bare bones. And that's the time in which sometimes you have to turn it over to a friend and say, do the dirty work if you can't. Or go back to your coach and say, hey, let's look at this if you can't figure those things out. But the thing that you don't want to ever do in your cutting is don't cut out the conflict. Conflict is what keeps people on the edge of their seats. If you don't believe that's true, look at shows like Maury Povich and Jerry Springer and all those crazy shows. They're all built on conflict, maximizing conflict. People love to see conflict. And that's what they go to the theater to watch as well, is the conflict that your characters are going through throughout in a story. So you want to make sure that you keep as much of that in there. And I've had students work on cutting a script, and then I'll go back and I'll look at it and I'll go, but you cut out the climax, or you've cut out the conflict. That's the meat. So build it around that conflict. And then I'll make sure, and what I oftentimes will do too, is go through and start cutting individual lines throughout the whole entire thing so that I don't end up missing anything. But because you lose a little bit of kind of everything, so that also kind of helps shrink it down as well. Another technique that I've often used as well with my cuttings is sometimes the play's ending is not the greatest, and sometimes the play's beginning is not the greatest. So I will take things and I will rearrange the order, and I will put, something that's on page 102 is now the way that my piece starts, because I think you've got to always build a strong beginning and you've got to build a strong ending. For a play like Dancing at Lunasa, Brian Friel already had an amazing beginning. When I cast my mind back to that summer of 1936, many different memories offer themselves to me. That's an opening. That's the way the play opens. When I think of it as dancing. That part about, because language no longer existed as I just did before, that's the way that play ends. It has a great beginning, it has a great end. But on some of your scripts, it ends with, or okay, or, and that's what I thought. And you're just like, how do I do this? So you've got to go through there and you've got to build it based off of the literature of Maybe you use something from page 102 and connect it to page 98, which also connects to page 4, etc. And so you have to sometimes rearrange to get it just the way that you want it. But you've got to keep this in mind. People should be able to watch your performance and still know what that play is about. They should not be watching your performance and going, I thought this was about this, but they made it a play about that. It still should make sense in terms of the author's intent. And oftentimes, what I will do as well is I will take my cutting after I've finished putting that cutting together, and I will have people that have nothing to do with theater or forensics listen to it. And then I'll ask them, so what was this about to you? Or what didn't make sense to you? Oftentimes, what you've got to think about is making it so incredibly easy for your judges to follow. And I tend to find that people sometimes outside of forensics are the best people to ask because they'll honestly tell you, well, this didn't make sense or that didn't make sense. And the answer is not, well, they're just stupid. The answer is not, well, they're just ignorant and they just don't understand what my art is about or whatever. No, that's not the answer. The answer is that your job as an actor and as a person cutting that script has got to be to make it so that that story is so incredibly clear that even a 5-year-old can understand it. So, in going back over cuttings, number one, read and read often. Number two, and that's reading many different things, because sometimes you'll find things that don't fit you, but they'll fit a person on your team better. That's fantastic. Number two, start with finding plays that are award winning. You will find that the stronger the literature is, the less amount of work you have to do actually. Doesn't mean that you're not working hard, but the worse your literature is, the more work you have to do in order to make that bad play seem like it's a good one. And sometimes cutting a bad play doesn't necessarily fix it. Sometimes it does. Sometimes playwrights write too much, and the best thing that ever happened to them was your pencil going, okay? But find literature worth doing. Number three, find plays that are challenging to you, that are just a little bit ahead of you, so that it makes you have to continuously keep working. Number four, don't be afraid to build your beginning and build your ending. Number five, make sure that that story builds and changes. How is your character different at the end of that cutting than they were when they began? And do we get an opportunity to really see that journey develop throughout? And I guess here's some other advice that I would give you is don't be afraid to cut. If you all think that my first cutting was brilliant, you have another thing coming. I had to hone in that skill. Just like for some of you all learning on how to drive, you just don't have that skill set quite yet, but you'll get it. You figure it out. That's the same thing with cutting. You've got to dive down into it, and it may seem overwhelming, and it may seem like, my goodness, this is taking a lot of hours. And then it may seem like, my goodness, I can't find the right script, and I'm spending all this time trying to read all these scripts, and I just don't understand it. And why is my teacher making me do this? And this is so hard. And exactly, how hard do you think it was for your teacher to find their cuttings, or for your coaches to be able to find those cuttings? It's not easy. It will give you another appreciation for the work that your teachers and that your coaches have to do. But if it's frustrating and it takes a while and all of that, that's because it's supposed to. It's not easy to do. but it is so worth it. And then what you might find is, like I found, is that the more and more you cut, the more and more you can't wait to cut more. And then that's where it begins to get fun. So I hope that this was helpful to you all. I cannot wait to see everybody next year in Houston finally. We have been trying to get to Houston for years, and we will finally get to Houston and be able to see you all live and in person. But until that time comes, be working on your cuttings. Keep working on your performances. I hope you all are having an amazing NIETOC experience. The tournament is called The Experience for a reason. And I hope you all are having the experience of a lifetime. And I hope my little thoughts or my ramblings about cuttings help some kid, help some teacher out there be able to tell these brilliant stories that these playwrights have written. So until I have an opportunity to see you all again, let me say, God bless, keep working hard, and whatever you do, wear your mask. We ain't out of this pandemic just yet, but we getting there. Bye-bye for now.